Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a paid advertising. TheOnlyGround.com, onlyground.com is one of the most amazing places for information that I consistently go to. If you guys want to have conversations about our old interviews or even topics that we don't discuss, the group of people that are on the onlyground.com message boards are some of the most brilliant that I have ever come across. Those little like knick-knack facts that we get here and there, that's where a lot of it comes from. Please check out the link in the bio.
Welcome to the show. I am MMA insider and Herb Dean's dog sitter, Joey Venti, and you're listening to the MMA History Podcast, the only podcast dedicated 100% to the preservation of mixed martial arts history. Interviews and stories about the early days of MMA direct from the men who lived it. Hundreds of interviews, thousands of hours of research, all conducted by the most obsessed mind in the business, the MMA detective Mike Davis. Join us as we document the history of the sport we all love. Welcome back to the MMA History Podcast. I am Joey Venti. I'm with the host of the show, the MMA detective Mike Davis, and today we have a special episode. Today is Judo Gene LeBell Appreciation Day, and we've assembled a panel of MMA pioneers whose lives have been touched and enriched by the man in the pink gi. First of all, we've got friend of the show, creator of Extreme Fighting Championship and LeBell Black Belt, John Perretti. We've also got, coming back to the show for a second time, MMA coach, referee, and all-around MMA pioneer, also a LeBell Black Belt, John Donahue. Thank you guys for being here. We may get Igor Zinoviev dropping by later, and if so, we'll be happy to have him.
Gentlemen, John Donahue, you're in, obviously, Australia. We got John Perretti in Houston with a nice piece of artwork that will be displayed at his art exhibit in August in Houston. Joey Venti is in Los Angeles, and I myself, I'm in Chicago. So we got a bunch of different time zones here. So let's talk about Gene LeBell. I know we briefly kind of went over it in each of your interviews. Let's talk about how we met him. John Donahue, we're going to start with you. How did you meet Gene?
I was originally introduced by Bill Wallace. I was training with Bill at the Jet Center at Benny's place before it came down in the earthquake. And Bill had made the comment to me, and I'd sort of heard it before, but I saw Gene in magazines and didn't really know much. And Bill was of the opinion that, you know, Gene had forgotten more about inflicting pain on people than he and I would ever learn or know. And he said he'd take me down to meet him. And that was at LA City College at the time, where he was teaching judo on Monday nights, I believe. The other judoka down there was Hayward Nishioka. But Gene was running pretty much a straight judo class. So that's where Bill took me down, introduced me to Gene. And that's where, you know, I had that first, I might have mentioned in the first podcast where, you know, Gene didn't even really say hi, shook my hand, and which was that big Fred Flintstone thick hand that was really soft grip, which is like which I learned later was an old sort of pro wrestlers type handshake. There's never any strength in it or anything like that. So that was almost like a signature of the old pros. And that's when he said, Bill was standing next to me and he just said, choke me. So I did the whole, you know, did I talk about that in the first podcast or not? Or I don't want to bore you again with it.
No, you did. So, I mean, it's, yeah, you kind of talked about that. So that's meant through Bill Wallace. Okay.
Yeah.
John Perretti, your first introduction to the man we're honoring today.
I think the phone, I was looking for him. I was in New York. And I think that the phone number was from Betty Akitas, but I got to talk to Carl Gotch. And I talked to Carl Gotch for about an hour from my office. In Hampton Bays, New York. He went on and on and on and on about Gene. If you're going to try to learn how to do this, you know, you got to sink out Gene LeBell. So I got his number and I called him, and Gene and I spoke for over 2 hours. And the next thing he said was, look, you really want to do this, you better get on a plane. I got on a plane the next morning, and moved to California.
So it was like that. Was he one of those guys, John Perretti, that just kind of oozed like that special just aura?
he was, to me, magnetic. He and I ended up emulating him in so many ways. Some people said that all my training and teaching after meeting LeBell changed completely. I embraced that whole sadistic thing, let me get my hands on you notion. I really, he changed my life. In so many profound ways. He changed my training completely. You know, I put my hands and my feet in my pocket for 10 years.
John Donahue?
Yeah, he did. I mean, he was a very sort of quiet, unassuming sort of guy. Obviously very sort of character driven, the way he sort of got around with his little bucket hat, and very unassuming. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have what I have now. The friends I've met, obviously meeting John, my MMA, jiu-jitsu, martial arts sort of career, the people he introduced me to, I wouldn't be where I am, or have the knowledge that I have, or the attitude towards training. And similar to what John's saying about that whole thing, you don't really get from, let's say, that you don't get from jiu-jitsu or just about anything else, that whole old school pro catch type mentality of training and inflicting pain or making people feel uncomfortable. That all came from Gene. So I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for him. It was obviously pivotal in my life. So
I think, all right, so I did a recent social media search. Just forget YouTube, forget like the internet message boards. I looked him up on social media and the things being said about him.
mm-hmm.
There seems, I don't know if it's jealousy, but it's like people kind of like to go out of their way to either point fingers or just kind of dismiss him as a martial artist.
May I say something?
Yeah.
Just on that note, Carl Gotch told me that, he called me Sonny on the phone, by the way, Sonny. He told me that he never beat Gene in a straight shoot. It's really interesting, right?
Saying a lot.
Here's an icon.
Right? Let me kind of set the table on that for those people that tune into our podcast, for some of the more modern guys, and this obviously is a beginning guy. Carl Gotch taught Sakuraba leg locks. He is, people always say, Maeda is like the founder. Shoot wrestling or shoot fighting died. It absolutely died, except from a very few, like, small group of people. And Carl Gotch is the guy that really understood leg locks from that old school generation and brought it back to Japan. So, I mean, it's like you're talking about a legend when you speak about Carl Gotch. Let's talk about the cabin. When do you guys get the invite to the cabin, which was John Donahue, would you describe the cabin and the invite part?
Yeah, I think I trained at LACC for a little bit, and Gene asked me. He said, "Oh, if you're interested, I've got a cabin in Fraser Park. It's got a little dojo set up there." He said, "If you want to come up and do some extra training on a weekend." At that stage, I think it always was sort of invite only. Otherwise, you'd never find the place. It was at altitude, so training was always a little bit more difficult. So that was early days when I first started doing judo with him. I just got the invite, and of course, just like John jumping on a plane the next morning, I sort of jumped at it.
Was it small? I mean, it's invite only. How many people were in the room with you?
Yeah, the cabin itself was quite large, but the dojo he had set up was, I don't know, John, what do you think? 20 feet, 20 feet by 20 feet? It wasn't big.
15 tatami?
Yeah. And you'd be, if you had 8 people in the room, it'd be very full, like trying to roll or whatever else.
Yeah, unless you had like somebody in the room who had an incredible ego, and then it took up the room. But I'll tell you something about. By the way, the tatami was red so that blood didn't show. That's a quote, right? So the cabin was The cabin was for training, and this is another quote, the cabin was for training and motorcycles are sex.
So,
Yeah.
John Donahue, I was also told that like one of your kind of introductory like avenues to him was training at John Lyons' garage back in the day.
Oh, Mark Lyons?
Or is it Mark Lyons? Okay.
Yeah, Mark Lyons. Yeah. No, Mark was, I would go to the cabin on a Saturday night with, I was initially by myself, and then quite a bit later then Silvio or Silverado, you know, I sort of met him, and we would sort of carpool together. But then I would go to Mark Lyons' garage the next day in the morning because he trained at the Machados with me. And I first started jiu-jitsu. He was a brown belt, so he helped me quite a lot with a small group of guys. And I would often take, because the gene stuff was frowned upon, obviously, at jiu-jitsu. So I would play around with that on a Sunday morning with the other jiu-jitsu guys. So I sort of was training all during the week, and then Saturday drive to Gene's, leave at midnight, 1 a.m., drive home, 2 hours, get to bed, get up, be at training the next morning at 9 a.m. at Mark's place to play around with stuff.
And you met Eric Paulson there?
I don't know if I met Eric at Mark's place or the Machados. I honestly can't remember.
Okay. And did John Perretti, did Paulson ever make his way out to the cabin?
Not when I was there. And as he said, it was invitation only. My partner in crime going out there was John Lewis. In fact, coming home one night at 4:30 in the morning, 4:15 in the morning, we crossed over a bridge, which 24 hours later disappeared, and a motorcycle flew its last flight to death. That was the earthquake.
Oh, yeah.
That was 24 hours after we crossed at 4:15 in the morning. That's when we left the cabin. We crossed that bridge, and the next day that bridge was gone at the exact same time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a Glendale cop who drove his motorcycle right off of it. Yeah, sad.
Terrible.
So,
24 hours earlier, we wouldn't be talking.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, you guys. The one thing that I went through my research that I learned was Gene loved talking on the phone. Like he loved having long conversations on the phone with many different people. Was it like a history type lesson, or was it how are you doing today type conversation? John Donahue?
On the phone?
Yes.
No, Gene loved to talk about the old days and different things. And so there was a blend of, like you said, he was such a caring individual. And I sort of go back to that social media stuff you mentioned before. I never saw a side of Gene where he was an asshole to anybody. I mean, or if they dismissed him as in the martial arts, like you said, they're either newer generation or they're brainwashed by what's out now and all that sort of stuff. And I understand it. They never got to feel what the guy was like when he puts his hands on you. And so I understand. I mean, and the word legend and a myth and this gets thrown around so easy. And John and I and a select few others were so incredibly lucky to actually understand and see what this man was about. And I don't like to put someone on some sort of ridiculous pedestal, but I feel like I'm, as John is, and there's a few others that are, I've trained a lot of jiu-jitsu and not as much stand-up as John, but enough boxing and kickboxing and different things. Gene felt like no one else I've ever trained with. And that's not me trying to put him up, or now that he's passed away, create this urban legend or any of that sort of crap. It's just real. I mean, I've trained with some world champion jiu-jitsu guys, some other guys who Shudo in Japan and different things. And I've been, and they've all been great, but no one has ever felt like Gene when he gets hold of you. And to try and express that to people nowadays, it's almost impossible, because you can tell the story, but feeling is believing. And to be lucky enough to experience that, and then that puts me on the path to where I got to, and as lucky as I am to be where I am with what I've sort of gone to with martial arts and the friends I've made, that all comes from him, you know. And if you haven't experienced that, of course there's going to be doubt, and of course you're going to think, well, it's just a myth, it was blown out of proportion, and you know. So that's the part that's upsetting for me, and it's because of who he was as an individual and as a person and as a man. So
What year did you meet him in? Just so we can do some math, how old he was at the time.
I probably met Gene, let's see, 80, 89, maybe 88, 89.
Oh, wow. John Perretti, feeling
Wait, but
Gene LeBell.
I can't do math. And I had 16 concussions, so I can't do that. But when I met him, there's something about what John said is so poignant. You can't understand the experience of him, right? But you have to understand the physicality of him. So first of all, his hands were this thick. Like, I'm not fucking around. Big freckle paws, right? Just these enormous fucking things, right? His head, I have a pinhead, right? But his head was this big. You can see pictures of me and him. His head is this big. He's a fucking gargoyle. He's got size 16 triple E feet, right? They're big, flat, like flippers, right? And when he laid on you with intention, and he always had intention. I mean, I've seen him, maybe John said he hasn't seen him stretch somebody for the fun of it, but I've seen him stretch people.
Oh, I've seen it plenty of times.
So the point, I didn't know what you're going to back off on that.
Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make is that he was a gargoyle. He could use his weight. I learned about smearing people, right? Like you're like in side control and pushing forward to make your weight bigger, right? Because he's taking your rib cage and bending your rib cage when he got side control. Or forget Kesikatami. I mean, just like if you were in Kesikatami with Gene LeBell, not to mention he was twisting and turning your neck and breaking your shoulder in 4 different dimensions. But you were in one of the most oppressive places under the weight of the man. Right, John?
Yeah.
You know, if I may backtrack, he also taught Inoki leg locks. So Antonio Inoki, I mean, a legend in the Japanese scene.
Yeah.
He also, I mean, Carl Gotch also taught him leg locks. So it's like anybody that questions his lineage, you can't. I mean, look at Pride, Igor Zinoviev, John Lewis, both of you two. You've got people from many, many different backgrounds, all of which walking away with the same amount of respect as as the other person. So you got a Sambo guy, you even got a Pederneiras black belt. You got yourselves. I think John, you're a black belt under Machado, and John Perretti, I know that you're a true Lebellian. All of you guys have the same amount of respect. So it's like that pushback. It's either you're a sycophant for a particular family, that you pay monthly to, or you're just being a jerk.
Or people have an aversion to pro wrestling. If you do that many worked matches, people maybe question your legitimacy. I mean, that could be a big part of it.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
John Perretti.
So on the handsome guy's note, right? He did those things, right? I never did those things. I don't watch wrestling, right? And I have never made a work match, right? Nor as John Donahue ever refereed a work match, right? So the separation for me is I'm a purist, right? I'm a opinionated pugilist, right? So I am a guy who has an aversion to that kind of stuff, and yet LeBell was he could stand in 2 places at once. He preferred a comedic cover story. He made little comedic sculptures out of metal. He drew funny little caricatures and sent people Christmas presents. But the other side of that man, you know, you can't even understand, like, training with him for 8 or 9 or 10 hours and him going over 150 finishing holds.
Well, where I think what might get lost, the UFC came in 1993. It was the United States, like, kind of like first look at what this whole ground fighting thing was all about. But what gets lost in translation is on June 26, 1976. Oh, wait. On December 2nd, 1963, in Salt Lake City, he was the first mixed martial art event ever to take place under a sanctioning body and broadcasted live on TV. Yeah, it was Milo Savage versus Judo Gene LeBell. Milo Savage, time he was 50, 46, and 9 as a pro boxer. And Gene LeBell obviously had some judo accolades. Have you guys ever watched that fight?
Yeah.
Hundreds of times.
I think it was almost just like obviously a few decades ahead of its time.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely was. And obviously there was those restrictions placed on Gene with the having to wear a gi and all that sort of stuff. And he couldn't throw a punch or a kick. And, you know, so he was very restricted. But yeah, I mean, once again, well ahead of his time, well ahead of that. And that's where we go back to, he doesn't get credit for being the first one sanctioned, like you said, to actually jump in a situation that's completely unknown and foreign. It's never been done before in that sort of forum, and to lead the way, and that just gets forgotten.
1963 was the first. I mean, 1963, 30 years, just under 30 years. It was November of 93, December of 63, like 30 years before the Gracies. This guy's submitting people on the ground.
Yep. And submitting them savagely too. Well, no pun intended with savagely, but, you know, Gene would always tell the story afterwards that he had to go into the rooms and he was talking to Milo after. And while he was talking to him, Milo would just constantly just his head would drop and he'd sort of go in and out of consciousness. And like John was alluding to before about the two different sides of Gene, you could have the kindest, most generous person you'd want to meet and have as a friend, or the absolute sadistic bastard who would, okay, if we're in a fight, that means fight. So I'm going to hold the choke on. It's going to be hard as hell. And I'm not going to let go. Just unconscious, like in a bad way.
You know, you just don't understand. John brought this up. We had a private conversation, and John brought this up to me, and the lucidity of it was just outstanding. He said that once a week, and if I got this wrong, John, just jump in, that once a week he has this Lebellian thing. And by the way, that's how I teach at the police academy, right? And he has this Lebellian thing, but everybody gets so sore, cut, hurt, and, you know, having to ice everything because it's so rough and tumble. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of like an honor to Gene. We run a Gene LeBell class on a Friday night that's just 2 hours long, and you know it's got 30-40 minutes of hard conditioning to warm up, and then we're going into, you know, some sadistic techniques, and it's just a lot more. You know, it's hard because you can't make things now how they really were, because like if I wanted to run my school as I would really love to, and my idea when I moved back to Australia, I'd probably have about 4 people training.
Yep.
I have to have that one night where it's like, all right, you're going to see what harder training actually is, and the physicality, and you know the rubbish bin's there if you need to puke, and you know whatever else, or if you leave the mat, don't bother coming back on. Leave the gym.
Oh shit!
You're right. You're either in. I don't mean leave permanently, but yeah, it's almost like you're on the mat. You're here to train. You don't get off the mat, right? If you want to leave and quit, okay, we'll go home. This class isn't for you. So only because I don't want to lose some of those elements that Gene instilled in me and John and whatever else. It's, you know, it's like Otherwise, who carries that torch, or who carries? I mean, I can't really hold a candle to Gene, and I don't ever think I do, but unless you're carrying on some sort of that mantle and showing the techniques that he showed me, well, what happens to them?
Yeah. And you know, if one of those people in that gym get inspired by that and continue that, it's his legacy continuing.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
So in my last school, the UFC training ground in Riverhead, New York, Flanders, New York, which I opened immediately after losing my loft in New York City. And I called it the UFC training ground. Everybody would come out there to train, and on the walls, because just like at Gene's, train at your own risk.
No insurance.
Signs, no insurance. Those are the signs I had up, emulating Gene, and it just understanding that a correlation and adoration that John and I have, and I believe John Lewis too. It's hard to talk about him as if he was just, another guy. And of course, I have, wrestled with everybody in that day, and he probably continues to. But there's something just horrific about the experience of, being mauled by this man. And I wrestled with Tom Erickson. I mean, so there are human grizzly bears out there, but Gene was a gargoyle. I mean, he was not fully human. There's an anatomical aspect to him that you guys will never get, because his rib cage was like this big. His bones were they were horrifying. We talk about the ulna and how it's the grappler's, bone to put on people, right? Well, his was like a tree trunk. I'm not fooling around. It was this giant forearm that would come freckling across your face, and your head would go on backwards. And then he would lean on you. I mean, he could take you out or break things. He used to say, take that leg home with you. Just take that leg home with you, John. He used to say that to me all the time,
He was involved in some really cool stuff as well. And one of which at the time, I'm not going to say it was frowned upon, but it was kind of looked at as a flop. He was the referee June 26, 1976 against Muhammad Ali versus Antonio Inoki in a boxer versus Burt versus pro wrestler. So just so everyone can kind of understand the magnitude of it, it's the only person both of those people agreed to be a referee, which that alone is insane.
Turn down Carl.
1.4 billion people watched it worldwide. 5.4 million viewers in Japan and 2 million viewers in the United States.
And that was closed circuit. It's not like they watched it in their living room. They went out to theaters and arenas and watched it closed circuit.
Staggering, that figure. When you think about that compared to today, if you tried to put it in today's terms, I don't know what it would be. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And he talked about it endlessly.
What would he say?
He said that we told him to take him down and his fight was going to be over. All he had to do was do a double and take him down. But then someone else came in and told him to not do that, to do this silly ass land, this kicking crap. And it just, if you just think about the fight, 10.5 feet away, he does a double or single, he takes him down, and that's the end of the fight. Everyone knew that would be the end of the fight. So that would happen in what? 8 seconds, 9 seconds, you know, if you took a breath before that, you know, it wouldn't have been the fight that, you know, it turned out to be. And I think he blamed Carl for that. Do you recall, John?
No, I don't. I remember he wasn't happy with the way it, like you said, he just said that it should have been over a lot faster, and you know exactly. So
It was a
Yeah,
really
he talked about it endlessly.
Joey, how would you describe the fight?
well, there was a really weird set of rules that were put in place, and it wasn't put in place until the night before the fight. I don't think Inoki was allowed to take him down and be on top of him. But one of the rules is you were only allowed to throw a kick if you were on the ground. So he did this like silly ass slide tackle trying to kick Ali in the leg,
yeah,
40 or 50 times. That's what the whole match ended up being. But it was because of the rules. He wasn't allowed to just shoot a double, and Ali knew he wouldn't be able to get him off of him. So in an attempt to make the fight more interesting, they made it, a silly spectacle.
Well, okay. So how do you knock a guy? How do you get an 8 count or a 10 count when a guy is diving at your legs and there's no count given?
Yeah. Well, that's why he's doing it, is so he doesn't get hit,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like they were all kind of checkmated. I have to assume the negotiating and positioning of that rule set went all the way up until probably like fight time, if I had to guess. Yeah. And with the amount of viewership and dude, these are stadiums filled with people, like baseball stadiums and football stadiums to watch it. I can't imagine the payday on that for each of those guys.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Ali got 10 million. I don't know what Inoki got.
That's still nothing. That's still very little as compared to probably what that generated over $100 million. For sure, it generated over $100 million. If they got 10% of it, they're lucky.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, Gene was the only one, like the promoter of the fight, like would dismiss it. And the only one that would speak positively about the experience was LeBell. And he was like very honest about it. He was like, it was an interesting match of styles of two people at the best in their sport. It was the rule set that kind of inhibited it. It was very interesting. And for the person that actually knew what was going on, it was interesting. For the people that had no idea what groundwork was, not so much. It took 3 UFCs really for jiu-jitsu to take, foothold in the United States. He also go ahead, John.
I got a question for John. Hey, John, where were you when you saw UFC 1?
I think I might have been at Hegan's place. Maybe.
Because that was a debacle in my eyes, and I was watching it because Extreme Fighting got canceled.
Yeah.
But we know that history. But it's the way people experience the things. Sorry.
Okay. So I just kind of want to give people a timeline of events. That Inoki thing where, you're a superstar, even having your face on that. That's June 26, 1976. On July 22nd, 1976, so you're looking about literally less than a month later, he's back in the United States, and he was charged with accessory to murder with Jack Ginsburg for the killing of private investigator Robert Duke Hall. Did he ever talk to you guys about this?
He never spoke to me about it. I want to say he spoke to me about something else that happened to a close friend of his, the original guy who played Superman in the old black and white TV series. That was that Steve Reeves? Was it George Reeves? Another Reeves. But no, he never really spoke to me about that. I heard later on there was something to do with that, but he never spoke to me about it.
John Perretti?
Well, he spoke to me about it. He talked about what had happened, and he talked about that, he was supposedly in trouble at the time. but it was, what was the clinical outcome?
Right. So dude, I went on a rabbit hole just on this case alone. And like it was not good for my mental health for like the things that I was able to pull. So let me just kind of quantify the players. You got Judo Gene LeBell, he's involved with Hollywood. Somebody that's plugged, respected, sadistic, nice. I mean, there's a lot of words being used to describe him. Jack Ginsburg was a pornographer that also ran an escort service.
Yeah, now I remember that.
Okay, so Robert Duke Hall was a private investigator. Here's kind of where things get a little bit tricky. Watergate, the big Watergate that, the big scandal that caused the president of the United States to step down. What they try to tell you was like wiretaps and taping phone calls, but the reality of the situation is it was prostitutes with high-end political people, and the prostitutes were recording them. This Robert Duke Hall had a lot of that, like a lot of that blackmail, and it just didn't come from Watergate. It stemmed across other areas of people and very powerful people. So he was somebody that was like an information collector. And Gene drove Jack Ginsburg to the crime scene and drove him back. LeBell took about a year in prison for that, and everything got thrown out. Everything was dismissed.
So he didn't serve the time.
Well, he sat there for a year.
He sat there for a year. Wow.
Yeah.
Dismissed.
Yeah, like if you really just kind of like, I was looking for court documents. Like I was spending way too much time. Dude, he ran in social circles and had the trust of people that were incredibly powerful.
Understandably so.
Does that surprise either of you two?
Early Hollywood days, probably not. I mean, it was a different scene than it is now.
No, sir. I am not surprised. I mean, the man made more movies than Kirk Douglas.
Oh, by far.
Yeah, he was also he worked films with Elvis Presley as well. Now, Elvis also another martial artist. Did Gene respect him as a martial artist?
Elvis?
He was a black belt. He had a black belt.
I don't want to speak ill, but yeah.
Well,
is that your comment, John Donahue? Yeah, that's it. We're gonna quote that.
He could dance and sing, and the camera loved him.
That's true.
Yeah, he
also worked with James Cagney. It was I think he was James was might have been a brown belt in judo.
Oh wow. Oh. He also at UFC 17 he made his UFC debut as a judge.
How'd that happen?
John, were you with was this one of your first events for the UFC?
13.
13 was your first. Okay.
Yeah, but how did that happen? I had to break arms to get him to fucking do that.
Was it? Yeah. I mean, where was the pushback?
It was to make him a judge. I had to like convince Meyerowitz that he was worthy of being a judge. Right? Think about that. Of all the things that you want to do, like I had this really cool idea, right? Coming from extreme fighting, right? That I had the best referee in the world. Right? And you would think that me saying I have the best referee in the world would be enough to get somebody to be a referee on the UFC.
Well, you're obviously speaking about John Donahue, who refereed all of your extreme fighting. John Perretti, what was the pushback from getting John Donahue as a referee over at the UFC?
The pushback. The pushback was that John Perretti was the enemy. the pushback was a giant lasso of back talk and backstab, and I mean it was like a little high school over there. Wormies talked to you about that.
It sounds like they wanted to treat you like an employee rather than a partner.
No, they treated me like an enemy.
Even once
But-
you were on the payroll.
Yeah, man. So did the payroll. So, you have to understand that this show is not about me, and this show is not about the UFC. Let's
Okay.
just focus.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And you know what? I've kind of X'd out certain questions because of that. So, I mean, UFC 17, Dan Henderson is in a 4-man tournament, beats Carlos Newton, kind of a controversial final, but I agree with it. Alan Goes, too, another controversial win for Dan Henderson. He had 2 that night. Chuck Liddell debuted against Noe Hernandez. Mark Coleman got knocked out by Pete Williams. And Frank Shamrock beats Jeremy Horn in overtime by submission. UFC 17 is
The
phenomenal.
fight.
Phenomenal.
But
Phenomenal.
wait a second, don't forget, it's like the stranglehold to get rid of this amateur format and have just fights and stop with this silly tournament shit, right? This amateur format, it's so difficult, so fucking difficult.
So one of our past interviews was Oleg Tektarov. And Gene LeBell's name got brought up, and the amount of respect that Oleg had for him, it was just an immense amount of just adulation and respect. Like it was, it's like anybody that felt him understood. But then there was also videos of Rorion and Hoist. They're still on YouTube right now, with lots of pushback, like lots of, let me tell you the story about him.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Gene saying that because Gene would get on with everybody. If you couldn't get along with Gene, the problems was with you. He was teaching at the police academy, as was Rorion at the time, and a couple of others, I think. And they got along just great. Everyone was completely fine. And then that whole Gracie challenge sort of stuff happened. And Gene, I think he was kind of blindsided by that whole thing, because he was all about being respectful and whatever else. And Gene said to me, I quote pretty close to, he said, if I see that guy again, I'm going to pick him by his fucking balls and body slam him. So because he was upset, he was just so disappointed and about the whole thing, and be able to talk to someone in a professional role at the police academy, helping the police out, and then they go and do that on the side, and then challenge people who are respected and legends in the martial arts, and all for the sake of bettering their own, their own cause and promoting jiu-jitsu and whatever else. So I guess he was pretty upset at the disrespect.
Yeah, I have a couple of quotes out of that. He called Rorion a pencil neck who couldn't tie his shoes in a real fight. That's a quote.
Here's the thing, like 1963 is when he fought. So like you're talking about somebody considerably older. And like the jealousy, if I were to refer to that as, whatever those actions were, Art Davey, in our interview with Art Davey, he brought up Gene LeBell as a name to referee UFC 1, and he said Rorion lost his mind. I think like the marketing aspect or component of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Gracie Jiu-Jitsu with what the UFC was, they didn't want any other fishing poles in the water, and certainly Gene LeBell would have a big line.
This, you gotta understand, like it's a movie business, right? Gene's a stuntman, and he could be a coordinator anytime he wanted to. He just didn't choose to. And Rorion's an extra, right? So and it's just there's a hierarchy that it's, and the Brazilians were ignorant, right? because, you know, they had just started this infomercial, and they really didn't know what the sport could be. They didn't have any forethought, and sometimes they didn't understand that a matchmaker was way ahead of them in the evolution of this component and coinage. So you people give them all this credit, but you know, they were signing to, we lost our backing twice, but they were signing to have Hoist fight, you know, this judo player from Russia, which, you know, might have changed the world.
Who was a judo player?
Eager.
Igor Zenobia.
There we go. Eager.
That would have changed history a bit.
Man, Sperry couldn't finish him.
Yeah.
I don't think always could have. John Donahue, favorite memory of Gene LeBell.
Geez, there's so many. I mean, you know, I have memories both on the mat, off the mat. You know, I'd go up to the cabin, and I remember him tucking my son, who was only little at the time. He unzipped his jacket, threw him down his jacket, so his head and arms were poking at the top. Then he'd take him on one of his motorcycles and do wheelies up and down the street with him sitting on tucked inside his jacket. And then, you know, things like putting my son, I think it was maybe a month, 2 months old, still in diapers. Gene had put him in his book and did a little chokehold with him lying on his neck in his encyclopedia book. He was just, for me, the family caring side of Gene was so special. I guess the other side of Gene, which I kind of sadistically enjoyed, was watching him stretch someone up at the cabin who was a little bit, I don't know, disrespectful. Or, you know, I remember myself and another guy that used to go up occasionally, Eric, we set a guy up once who brought his girlfriend up, and he was, I don't know what sort of martial artist he was. Anyway, he wanted to come up and, you know, roll with Gene and whatever else. So we said to him at the time, hey, Gene is not going to respect you unless you go really hard on him. And the guy was like, you serious? I said, yeah, dude, he doesn't, if you don't fucking try and really get stuck into him, you won't get an invite back. He won't respect you. So we both played this card to this guy. I can't remember who it was. Poor guy. Anyway, went out with Gene, and like I said in the previous podcast, Gene would give you about 5 minutes to do whatever you wanted to try to do to him. And he would just lie there and move and just counter and just be relaxed. And then once that time was up, it was his time. And this guy is just trying to rip into Gene's head. He had no real clue about grappling. He might have done a little bit before. And Eric and I just sort of just sniggering on the side. And when it was Gene's turn, my God, this guy, I mean, I've seen him do it to a few people, as I know John has. This guy was just in a place that you would not want to be. Like I said before, when Gene got hold of you, and he's the only guy I've rolled with that scares me. Like that, you know, this man could kill you, tear limbs apart, and I've never had that experience before. But this guy was experiencing that. Gene choked him out, and viciously too. And then he was on a mount position, and the girlfriend's off to the side of the mat. Eric and I are laughing over here. The girlfriend's over there. She's in hysterics watching this. And then the guy wakes up, and all he sees on top of him is Gene in a mount position, and he's onto him, ripping his head into again, and then choked him unconscious again. And then anyway, Gene finishes doing what he's doing. And the guy he's crawling back to his girlfriend, who's just visibly upset at this stage. And we're laughing over on the other side of the mat, and Gene looks over at us and just shakes his head. And I don't know, that always sticks with me. And the guy was completely fine. He was just, yeah, I was probably a little bit mean of us, but.
Initiation. He was a rite of passage.
Yeah, we all went through it. Gene just about choked me unconscious in front of Milo. I think I told you last time. That was just like looking up at just something that you have no control over. You can't escape if you want to escape. He's in such a dominant position, and it's so scary. So we've all been through it, you know. But like I said, you had the two sides of the coin, where Gene was such a loving, caring individual for you, your family, your friends, and Like I think John can attest to, like I said last time, he said, every time you get off the phone to Gene, he says, what can I do for you? And it's like, that's just who he was as a person. That was just, irreplaceable.
John Perretti, favorite moment.
Well, I don't know about a favorite moment. I mean, some of the favorite moment I had was going out and buying him clothes to wear on the contenders. That was shopping for him was one of my favorite moments. But the thing that John's talking about, I don't know if he's putting his name on that gag, but we all did that to people over there because Gene would be like smiling at somebody and then glare at you, watching because you were intently watching because there was an inherent nervousness building up inside you because you already knew how this was going to play out, right? And Gene would like squint at me and say, has he seen this? John, you've seen this? Oh yeah, Gene, I've seen it many, many times, right? And he goes, do you think he's seen it? And it's like, I don't know. No, Gene, he hasn't seen it, and then again, I mean, I don't know how many times he choked me out. I have no recall of it. I mean, I can't remember anything about that except waking up in such a horrible, inescapable place. You're smiling and giggling, but when I teach this shit, I call it drowning because people don't understand what it's like to drown and be drowned, right? And I drowned once and died. But drowning on the mat is something that he was a master of. And when he says you choked him out, revived him, choked him out, revived him, choked him out, revived, that was really common. That was common to stretch somebody who he thought needed an attitude adjustment.
Mhm.
And I never asked for an attitude adjustment, but I got adjusted for weeks on end when I first met him. And I got brought to the cabin like a day after I met him. And there were all kinds of usual suspects up there. John might have been there the first time he brought me up there even. I don't know. But what he's talking about, I attest to 100%. There's a nervousness that he could do anything he wanted to, depending on the mood he was in. He supposedly never drank alcohol, right? And I'm looking at you, Mike. He never drank alcohol, right? But for me to think that this man could be at large intoxicated in any way, shape, or form, John, help me, would be bordering on another Hiroshima. Right? Think about it, John. Fucking Gene's drunk in the hotel.
Yeah.
Probably not good. Probably not good. What I think also is important is to kind of understand where he comes from. Like when people look at Vince McMahon, oh, he's a second generation wrestling promoter, and you see Stephanie, and she's a third generation. His mother, Aileen Goldstein Eaton was her name. She was the wrestling and boxing promoter at the Olympic Auditorium. Like at the time, that's a very powerful position. So the game of entertainment and understanding, as well as access to him, was always top tier. Like he always had a good understanding of it. Like it was almost as if he was born into this. Did he ever talk about his mom?
Yeah, he did, and he talked a lot about the experiences there with his brother as well, and how that whole dynamic worked, and that's probably one of the reasons it led to, we mentioned before about the Ali Inoki fight. He would talk to me about when back then it was Cassius Clay at the auditorium was there, and he's learning how to box and hang around the likes of Sugar Ray Robinson and these sort of icons, and stories with promoting the wrestling and what his mum would do and how they would promote it. And he talked about Andre the Giant quite a lot and tell you stories about how big, and like, John Perretti was talking to before about how big Gene was as a man. I mean, he wasn't a big man when he was competing in judo, but as obviously he grew older, he just became this big, thick lump. But he would talk about Andre the Giant at the auditorium doing these commercials, and Andre would literally pick Gene up and sit Gene on his hand. Gene would be sitting here on his hand like so, and Andre would just stand there while Gene would read the commercial out. It'd be, tonight the auditorium, Andre put me down. We have whoever it was, wrestling or whatever else. And Andre would just stand there just with Gene doing this commercial, and just the experiences he had there and the fighters that were there, the boxing community, the wrestlers, etc., was obviously a pivotal time. So, I mean, and a lot of people forget, you talk about the history of it before, and you would know this better than I would, Mike, but the early history of the old pro wrestling, the crowds, that it was the #1 sport in the world. Bigger than boxing, bigger than baseball, bigger than anything, with the crowds they used to get with Hackenschmidt and all these old pro wrestlers. So, and that's that stuff we talked about before, as history goes on and it gets to Eileen's place at the auditorium, and then, we talk about the legacies continuing and dying out. I mean, that's really what we're looking at. So, but yeah, he would always talk about the auditorium and with fondness, and the family stuff there and the different experiences he had.
So in 1954, 1955, he was the judo national champion.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to 1995, you've got a young Rorion Gracie calling him out. Obviously, we addressed that. But the one response that I always liked from him was, how about if I fight your father, Elio? I'll fight your father, Elio. I mean, you're really young. And did he ever talk about Elio or even Kimura to either of you two?
Well, yeah. He spoke to me about Kimura. He was very respectful, but he just didn't understand why the move was called the Kimura by the Brazilians, because it was around, and like he said, it was a long time before Kimura was even thought of. The double wrist lock and all that sort of stuff, and the old school terminology that was then taken by the Brazilians, and well, let's call that the Kimura because that's what he was famous at doing, and we'll name it after the man, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, he would talk about how very good Kimura was, and all these different people. He spoke about that at the time when I was there. How I think he penned a letter to the Black Belt magazine at the time, printed after the Gracie challenge came out. And basically, after Gene was challenged as well, I mean, obviously Gene was coaching Benny Urquidez to fight. And then that whole thing happened where they asked Benny to put up money, even though they challenged Benny. And then, yeah, Gene said, well, I'll fight your father because we're closer in age than I am to Hoyce. And they found that all of a sudden disrespectful, challenging Elio. It was like, well, hang on, you guys challenged us, so what's, so.
It was so strange, man. Like, it was John Perretti.
So, there's something also that I teach. So you have to learn the language, right? You have to learn the language, and the language doesn't have people's names in it, right? So it's the figure 4 shoulder lock from Kesagatami, right? So you have to learn the language to understand so that you can speak to someone else about the language. This is very important, right? So to call something the guard when it's, foot and leg control, you have to be able to understand what people are saying. We all have to speak the same language as grapplers or mixed martial artists. I think it's really important. What he talked about a lot was Carl Gotch, but he also talked about the Iron Sheik, right? Now, the Iron Sheik was this, he said that he was the real deal. He knew so much stuff, and he had so much respect for that guy, because he could put it on you. Oh, he could put it on you from so many, he would just go off on that kind of stuff. And he loved Carl for the cross training, which he loved me for too, because of that whole idea of lifting and of thising and of swimming and of that, breath hold and all the stuff that goes into learning how to be a grappler. And he just, the man created the myth, right? The man really knew more than other people knew when other people came along, so to speak.
So I think it's kind of important to point out, wrestling at one point was not in the Olympics. The Olympics loves to subtract that sport occasionally. So the AAU was considered to be the world title for amateur wrestling. The same year that Gene LeBell was competing in judo, Hoisin Vazari, also known as the Iron Sheik, was a two-time gold medalist. So the Iron Sheik was legit very feared in the locker room and known as a shooter as well. So what Gene is saying has been stated many times in like wrestling shoot videos.
However, very few people are accoladed by LeBell, right? Yeah, he can say, so and so. Yeah, he's good. Yeah, he's good. But he had total disrespect for collegiate wrestlers, and on any level, all the way to the Olympics, he had total disrespect because they didn't have a finishing hold in their entire body. And that was a quote. Actually, I used that quote on the air against Dan Severn.
Well, if you're talking about pro wrestling and fake fights, Dan Severn is definitely a good topic. But this is about Gene LeBell, as you stated.
Sorry, I rode off on my horse.
No, it's okay. His influence also is something that I don't think people can grasp, like his influence, like in the stretch and length of it. For instance, Bruce Lee gets a lot of accolades by the highest of caliber of athletes in mixed martial arts. It's Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee. Well, when Bruce Lee he dedicated his time and life to creating Jeet Kune Do. In his book, he publicly thanked Gene LeBell for allowing him to understand the ground game and the catch aspect of it in order to fully make a well-rounded martial art. Like he said Gene LeBell was a main influence of Jeet Kune Do. John Perretti.
So, well, let's get it down. First of all, Bruce looks at Gene's book, right, and does drawings of Gene's photographs, and then they become part of Jeet Kune Do. Okay, that's a problem. Okay, the opposite of creative is imitative. Okay, Gene, always said the camera loved him. He always said that he was too small; he couldn't tie his shoes. And from his perspective, he could not train at those guys' gyms. He never went there because they all smoked pot or ate hash or did things that Gene was totally against. And so he couldn't train there. He never didn't go there. He didn't want to hang out with him, because he was completely against any extracurricular additives to life. And when you are bigger than life, then you must understand that the whole spectrum of color changes surrounding someone like Gene.
Yeah, it's intense. Like I think maybe his nice guy, like him being so kind, it allowed people that, I shouldn't say allowed, people stole from it without giving proper credit.
Literally stole from him.
And kind of like when the credit was coming, they jumped in front of Gene and took everything. Am I off on that?
No.
How often did you guys see it? Did you guys witness it?
Well,
I'm still witnessing it.
yeah, I mean, the amount of people that say I trained with Gene LeBell and they might have met him once or got a photo or did a seminar years ago or whatever, or, Gene got screwed over by his brother, family members, friends. There are a lot of people that were very loyal to Gene and all the way up to his passing and still are. But yeah, over the years, unauthorized books or not getting any money for stuff and being told one story and another happens. And yeah, it was, like you said, Gene's, ability for kindness and generosity to people was definitely taken advantage of.
Would he be upset? Like when he would tell you about the latest incident where he was taken advantage of? I mean, how would he take it?
He was saddened.
Yeah, I mean, he gives out so much, and then for people to, do that to someone of that ilk with that kindness and generosity, I saw him angry about a couple of things over time. I think more family stuff, but I think, like John was saying, it's such disappointment and sadness that people would treat him that way when he has done so much for them or told him a story. He didn't understand why they would lie to him about something and then take advantage, and whether it monetarily or reputation wise or whatever else.
There was one kind of controversial thing. His daughter, he found out he had a daughter later on.
Mm-hmm.
That was like an FBI agent. There was a lot of kind of like strange statements and more questions than there were answers in regards to it. Could you, one of you open up on it?
Well, I mean, the only thing I knew was her name was Monica. The way I heard it was she came, basically tracked Gene down and said that he was her father, and Gene, once again, didn't bother getting a DNA test. He just took people for face value. Opened his life for her, gave her money, gave her a car, looked after her kids as they got older, and even when passing, there was a fight for the estate. When Gene had cut them off because of that, I think quite a bit before that, I think they contested some of the estate and the trustee and a whole lot of dramas that was just completely unnecessary. So when Gene had always been so kind and generous of his time and also monetarily.
Okay. Gene had to kind of understand. It sounds like there was a lot of people, like bottom feeders, that would attach themselves to him. He had to see it. Did he see it coming? Was he blinded by it? Like it was like repeat behavior over and over and over again of people just trying to use and take. John Perretti?
The way he was.
He knew very well, and he was very pissed off about certain individuals who kept using his name as their stepping stone. Because logistically, they were in the same zip code. But he was very upset about a lot of things late in life. Very, very upset about family and friends and people that were not friends any longer, and people using him and borrowing money and not paying them. And he was upset. And I think he had very few people he could confide in. And we talked all the way to the end, and maybe after.
Wow. Let's talk about his black belts. There's only 4 of you.
And you find that so fucking odd, don't you?
I do.
Let's talk about that.
Well, you're absolutely here. So it's both of you two, John Lewis and Silverado. And why don't we start with you guys before I start with my questioning? John Perretti, go ahead.
Well, okay, so I'm the low man on the pedestal. Okay, no, it's true.
Are you the last?
Yes, sir.
Gene LeBell, black belt?
Yes, yes. Also, I'm not just the last, I'm the least. Right? So, you're talking about a bunch of people that are better than me, right? And I am the last to learn to grapple at 20 years past their primes, you know what I mean? So, so I'm not only the last, but I'm the least. So from where I stand, I decided to dedicate myself to become a grappler and to learn to put my hands on people. So it was very, very important for me, and I sought out, the messiah of it, to be accepted to do this thing and to be awarded, this kind of honor. It's giant. Like look at this. I'm on your show, right, with John Donahue, right, and the handsome guy, right, and the only reason I'm on your show and friends with John Donahue is because of Gene LeBell.
How many years did it take to get a black belt from Gene LeBell? How long were you training with him?
I think he gave it to me after 10 years, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to ask John Lewis.
John Donahue.
The question was
5 minutes for
why is
5
there
minutes for John.
I don't know. I don't really have an answer for you, Mike. I mean,
Why is there so few black belts?
maybe, I don't know, maybe he was, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe he saw us as the ones who really, I don't know, cared and loved it, loved him as a person. The whole package really took to what we were learning and embraced it. And maybe there was a part of us in a small way that was a small part of him in terms of the way he was. Like I said, I mean, I would never, and John's obviously self-effacing, putting himself as the least. I don't think that's the case at all. There's no hierarchy or anything. I can't even sit here and hold a candle to Gene's knowledge and experience or whatever, and would never try to. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think he sort of, in the later years, quite a bit past us, he might have given out a few sort of honorary type belts as whatever else I heard to like Oleg or Roddy Piper or, whatever. But yeah, I think we were I don't know, the ones who early days really gave a shit about what he was doing and really it became part of us. I don't know. I don't know. And, I mean, he would see the effort that like John would go to flying out and we would go to driving up every weekend and then going to LA City College and learning, asking questions and just being so, I guess, somewhat fanatical, not somewhat, being fanatical about it. So.
Well, if I may correct you, Oleg never received a black belt. I poignantly asked him. He said absolutely not, but then went on about a 2-minute speech about how much respect he had for Gene LeBell, about his knowledge. And
that might have been stuff I read in magazines or whatever else. I mean, because I didn't care in the sense of, hey, Gene, who's got a belt? Who'd you give? I could care less. I mean, my students give me shit about, stripes on a jiu-jitsu black belt or whatever else that I just don't care. Do you know what I mean? And Gene was that way too. I mean, it was important for him. And I think obviously for us to get those belts but it was never about that for me. And I'm sure it wasn't for John either. It was just learning from this man and being around him and, having that experience, I guess, was more important for me.
John Perretti.
Hey, John, did you get anything in the mail?
They tried to deliver it Friday and I wasn't home in the afternoon, so it's supposed to be re-delivered. So
what a shame. Okay.
You gonna tell me what it is?
No, sir.
Okay.
But it would have been an interesting excerpt. Hey, so we all have different perspectives, and again, you know, you get a lot of those people on, even on this show, who get on YouTube or something and say, I heard not a, you know, a Gene LeBell black belt, or
I never heard
something.
that. John, I've never heard that.
I saw it in writing.
Dude, you're talking, I mean, you're talking about a jerk off that's just trying to get you off your rocker, just trying to get you to yell at him. That's.
I understand. But you know,
I wouldn't even address it.
I just want, well, it's bigger, it's a bigger picture thing, because what we experienced is obviously, you know, we're trying our damnedest to tell you what it was about, but it's not, you know, it's not rolling around in a jiu-jitsu school. No offense, handsome, but the thing is that the training was so arduous that, you know, it was car accident that you had to recover from, because you had to go back the next day and the next day and the next day. And that's what John's alluding to eloquently, is that, you know, these people come on and talk about, you know, like, oh yeah, I trained with Gene, and look, I'm in this picture with Gene, and yeah, fuck you. You know, you don't understand that you got fucking worked once for about a minute, right? And we got worked all the fucking time, day after day after year after year. We just got worked and worked and worked and worked. You know, and here's a guy who, you know, go to tournament, do a seminar with, and, you know, he'll choke out 5 or 6 people, give him patches, and then hand all the patches off to me and say, all right, John, choke him out. You know, it's
Okay.
a level of dedication that people today have no fucking idea about, because it's not about this. You know, it's about this.
Let me kind of help put a little layer of context on this. Josh Barnett, somebody that is obviously world-renowned talent and incredibly respected. He goes on record numerous times to say, jiu-jitsu is the gentle art, but the catch wrestling, Gene LeBell style of grappling, is the violent art. He says it's not even the same thing. It's incredibly violent and very fast, and it's like Josh Barnett will go on about a 5-minute tirade talking about that LeBellian type system.
Yeah, and I coined that, by the way, on the air. LeBellian. On the air, I coined that. So we know what you're talking about. I personally am just not on the level of Josh Barnett to be able to comment on that. But, you know, I don't want to go on a tirade.
No. And like, if people wanted to say, well, it's just not practical in modern mixed martial arts, what I always refer them to, watch Carol Parisian fight Matt Serra. It is a phenomenal fight. It is a phenomenal fight with the LeBellian lineage and the Henzo lineage. Like, just it's poetic when you look at the history of both the lineage of each opponent.
Yeah.
Well, there's a grappling idea and a wrestling idea. So let's talk about, I don't know, a minor fight. Paulson Hume.
Well, I'm not such catch wrestlers though.
Yeah, buddy. But you see, you're starting to look at like comparisons of styles and you know, the brilliance of the techniques of the people. You know, that's a fight that just stands out in my brain.
Ahead of its time, for sure.
And you roll around with those two fucking guys, and they're just so good.
What about Chuck Norris? Like, he's somebody that comes with a lot of accolades. A lot of people obviously publicly go out of their way to put him over. Did he ever get on the mat with Gene?
Yeah,
Not with me.
Well, yeah, he came up to the cabin. I probably saw him up there maybe twice in my time at the cabin on the mats training. He was obviously a little bit older, but and Gene had a lot of time for Chuck just because Chuck was I didn't really know him. I met him a few times, and he was an absolute gentleman, incredibly humble, and he loved Gene to death. Um, so yeah, I don't think, I don't know my history of all that sort of stuff in terms of Chuck's fighting. I believe it was point contact, but
Yeah, it's karate. Yeah.
yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he couldn't kick above his waist. That's why you had to shoot him from below all the time, kicking.
So, but yeah, Gene was really close with, I mean, Chuck spoke at the at Gene's roast in LA that I went to. Yeah, he absolutely loved Gene, and Gene spoke very fondly of Chuck, and they were very close.
And Joe Louis, who I admired as a kickboxer, not like Bill Wallace, but Joe Louis publicly ducked us. John, I'm not going up there. No, I'm not going to roll around with you fucking guys. No. So, he was fearful. He was a smart man. He was fearful of ever getting, near us collectively, physically.
Gene also, he didn't let his work he didn't allow Hollywood to kind of dictate like who he was. Steven Seagal on the Marked for Death set, Gene choked him out. Gene choked him unconscious. Did he ever talk to you guys about that?
Yeah. You go,
Yes.
John.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. We're the fucking inner sanctum of LeBell. Of course he talked to us about that. In fact, Midge talked to me about that. She took me on the side and told me all about it. Told me the dresser's name, but I can't remember. It was a woman. And so it was common talk in the family.
Seagal sued him too, so he couldn't talk about it. Yeah.
Gag order.
Oh, so what Gene would do is when he'd do interviews, he'd make sure that they really pressed him about it. And he'd just go, "Oh, I just can't talk about it." So in other words, like he didn't say anything. You can find some interviews. In fact, Stephen Lambert and Lincoln Simon were also stuntmen. They witnessed it. So I mean, it wasn't just a he said, she said. I mean, there was a few people that were there.
This is the story of him pissing himself, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Shitting and pissing.
Really?
And you would too if you were violently taken out, handsome.
I've been choked out by LeBell. Like I held my bladder. That's the only positive thing I can say about the experience.
There's a gentle choke and there's a violent choke.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So my favorite LeBell moment is when I hired him as a stunt coordinator to be a stuntman in a film that I was coordinating. That was like the epitome of give back for me. It doesn't sound like much, but it is such a monumental give back in adoration of the man.
But you also know why Gene choked Seagal out, because they were having a discussion on martial arts and he was hurting a lot of stuntmen, and that was Gene's extended family. Gene would always say, you could be this far away throwing a punch, but the camera angle makes it look like you got hit. But Seagal apparently was not doing that. He was actually hurting stuntmen, and it became an ego trip. And Gene hated bullies. And he hated people that would take advantage of others. I remember speaking on the phone to him one night. It was nighttime, LA time. And he said, "Oh, hang on a second." He was on his little handheld phone. And he went downstairs, and there were some guys at the front door trying to sell a subscription to a magazine or something. They were trying to sell something. And Gene would go down probably no shirt on, gi, his gi pants on as he usually walked around the house. And then he said, hang on a second. And anyway, he's talking to them. And then he said, I'm going to have to call you back. So he started asking, he called me back about 20 minutes later. He said that he started asking questions about, well, you don't have any paperwork. You don't have any pens. You don't have any, why you're trying to sell me something, but you have nothing in your hands. And basically he said to me that the second of the two was sort of looking inside through the security door, looking what was in the house and all that sort of stuff. So Gene went chasing them. He chased them off. And then he said, I couldn't catch them. They were too quick. He said, so I started talking about their mum, hoping they'd stop and try to come back at me. He said, but they just kept running. So that's the sort of guy that Gene was. He hated anyone trying to put something over somebody else or commit a crime or like that, or being a bully. There's another one where he was on the set and there was some guy who was an extra or some bit part player, and apparently he was acting like a dick on the set, and this is day after day. And Gene walked through one day with David, his son, and Gene used to wear that old bucket hat with the little Gene LeBell patch on it and glasses and a little bit of a belly, and the guy apparently knocked Gene's hat off. And once again, trying to be a bully on set, and he'd upset some people on the set. And David said he was going to grab him, and Gene said no. So Gene's grabbed the guy down, got him in probably a Kesagatami type position. The guy's reached up to grab Gene's face and stick his fingers in his eyes probably, and Gene's grabbed his fingers in his hand and he's put it in the back part of his mouth where the molars are and everything. He's held the guy there. He's just staring at him and he's grinding on his fingers, twisting his fingers while he's just, staring at him. The guy's screaming and all this sort of stuff. And this is, I think, David telling me the story. So, and then the cops came eventually, took this guy, and the guy saying, oh, it's that guy. And the cops are looking over saying, do you mean the old man over there? And they just get in the car and they took him away. But that's how Gene was,
And by the way, I still do that too. We learn all the tricks. The back teeth are really important. He used to call it the lizard bite. Remember the key, John? You turn the key upside down and use your thumb as the lizard's jaw. Remember, you grab a little pinky on a guy and walk him away.
Yeah.
God, I just love that shit.
So in terms of the 4 black belts, you two obviously have got a good relationship, and John Lewis as well, but I don't hear much about Silverado. Do you guys have a good relationship with him, or is he a little bit estranged?
No, not estranged. I mean, I think it's like John and I guess, over the years. Silverado moved back to Brazil quite a long time ago, because Silverado was married to Gene's ex-wife, and they were still all friends. And that's how Gene met Silverado. And then I think they split up years later, and then Silverado moved back to Brazil. I think he started another new family, has kids. So that's he's still training jiu-jitsu, I know that. But yeah, we just kind of lost touch. I mean, there's nothing ill about it or anything else. I mean, I moved back to Australia, he moved back to Brazil. I mean, people just, I guess, drift apart, which is, I was so thankful that I was invited by you, Mike, to the podcast, and John jumped on, and I hadn't seen John in so many years. So, and we've luckily stayed in touch since, and it's just been great. So, because we have that common thread, obviously, through Gene to start it all, and then Extreme, etc. So,
John, Perretti, your relationship with Silverado?
I had no relationship with him. He was, a disappearing act, as I was a disappearing act. We just migrated in different directions geographically. I remember him. He was quite spindly, and he was very flexible. And obviously, I understand flexibility. I refused to do Gene's book, not because of Silverado.
What was the reason?
Well, there was a partnership there. I don't want to be in pictures, being, twisted up in a circle or something, and being stretched, into a split. I just didn't, it wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't, it wasn't what I was interested in, in being in that book.
Even as an homage to him, really? I mean, I understand, where you're coming from. You know what? Mark Schultz was on the receiving end of that type of behavior with a guy who I don't want to mention because I don't want any issues. But yeah, no, I can see it. I can see it. Huh. Did you guys ever work out with like Mondo Guerrero?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, Mondo saved me. He was the one who saved me from when Gene was joking me that one time.
Man, they say he was legit.
Yeah.
Well, he was pinioned in ways that, human beings don't get pinioned. He knew how to survive while being, in the hands of the freckle monster. Even if you wanted to go with him, he took you further than you were willing to go. I mean, even, it's not like Seagal where you run into him and give him your hand and he breaks your wrist for fun. I mean, Gene wasn't like that. Gene, if he wanted something, he took it. You didn't have to give him anything. Trust me, even if you didn't want him to have an appendage and he wanted it, he could just take it home with him.
Yeah.
John Perretti, how much pushback did you get with John Donahue as a referee in the UFC?
Well, I got enough pushback that John Donahue did not become a referee in the UFC.
What were those conversations like? Like, where was the doubt coming from? Like, other people refereed, other than John.
I don't think there was any doubt. No one could doubt his fucking ability. He was a fucking genius in there. There were guys that I fired, that were less than geniuses in there and couldn't control the ring. I fired a really close friend of mine who's a black belt of mine, Tony Molinax. In fact, maybe John Donahue was there that night because he couldn't control. He did one of them I thought was going to be one of the greatest fights in fucking history, and I got belittled about it. But he did Miletich Barnett.
Man, on paper.
Oh my God! You roll with those two guys, and then you put that together, and you go, Miletich Barnett, man, this is going to change the UFC. You're finally going to fucking believe me. And I was wrong, and then I got belittled in public by Marowitz.
Yeah, I think it was just two guys that understood who each other were and were afraid to pull the trigger. Yeah. So what
do you think, John?
About
Miletich Barnett.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, on paper, it should have been, one of the best. So,
John Donahue, okay, what was the reason you had heard that you weren't allowed to referee in the UFC?
Going back, I wasn't sure whether it was a money thing or they were just settled with the refs they had, or whatever. I think at the time I was definitely, I remember getting told about the potential of the opportunity, and I think it probably was John who told me. It wouldn't have been anyone else, but I can't remember the specifics of it in terms of, I thought it might have been a money issue, or they had enough refs, or I don't know. And I know after speaking to John, conversations he had with others, that actually wasn't the case. So
shocking to me. Yeah. I mean, it's not like, Big John McCarthy was doing 90% of the work, but there were other referees.
Yeah, you'd have to check with John what the blowback was on that, or the fight that he had. So I know he would have gone into bat for me, but he was obviously up against it.
There was also, like, in regards to modern mixed martial arts, Ronda Rousey has gone out of her way to cut countless videos about how much Gene meant to her, as well as her style, how it was defined. Just the road that she went down was defined by Gene LeBell. He even left her in his will.
Yeah.
That's
No
pretty cool.
comment.
Yeah, it's wild. Joe Rogan even hired him as a stuntman for Fear Factor.
Joe who?
Joe Rogan.
He has a little podcast.
Joe Rogan. I remember him.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the respect that he got behind the scenes is like a stuntman, and like I've seen like various message boards, like, this is not my idea. People have said there needs to be an Academy Award for stuntmen, and it should be called the Gene LeBell Award. Like, his name is still being circulated by those people.
That's a great idea. I love that idea. Hey, by the way, I have 3%.
Plug it in.
I can't. I'm in the fucking gallery.
There's no outlets in your gallery?
Well, I got it. By the time I get up and go to my studio, right, and bring an outlet out here, I mean, to plug in, I can't do that. I'm not an octopus.
Okay. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. Okay.
I got a question. The first time in the UFC that a fighter claimed to have been trained by LeBell was Joe Charles. Did either of you guys, was he around at the time? Did you guys train with him? Because that's his first time you heard LeBell's name at the UFC.
Not for me.
Probably for me, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just said not for me. So no.
Oh, okay.
I trained with him probably half a dozen times at Go Course.
All right.
No, you're not going to further on that?
Well, what? He could do one thing. He could put his fat knee on your fucking tibia and move and try to beat your guard. I mean, that was Joe Charles. This isn't about Joe Charles, so I don't want to.
Okay, that's fair.
Talk about fucking Joe Charles.
Let's talk about his grip. Let's close with his grip, and then we'll talk about saying goodbye. John Donahue.
Well, I can do this. I can walk my phone to my studio.
Yeah.
And okay.
We can talk.
Turn your camera off if you need to.
I don't know how to turn the camera off.
Okay. John Donahue, let's talk about his grip.
Yep. Like John was doing before, you just get used to, I'd spend hours just doing that and working on that, and then would ask him why he does that.
Describe it. Would you mind describing it?
So Gene's grip was, there's the classic one that people use is like a gable grip, which is all fingers like so, which is obviously still a great grip.
Yeah.
Gene would just transfer that lead thumb here underneath between index and middle finger, like so. And he would explain it like, it's probably hard for me to sort of do on camera, but if you're sort of coming around here, if I grab here or here, my fingers go across that far. If I slide that through a bit more, my fingers have a greater grab on my own hand here. So it became for him a stronger grip because you got more purchase on the hand with the pulling hand.
Well, this is the first time I'm going to disagree with John. The reason that the 3-finger grip is better than a 4-finger grip is because you're holding something smaller. That's a quote.
Which is
so essentially
exactly
it's
the same way of saying, it's a different way of saying the same thing.
So it's your thumb in between your index and your middle finger on a
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, do you still use it today?
Yeah, man, I teach it. I taught it 2 weeks ago. I teach like 12 different grips over a week for the cops, the academy guys who have to graduate through me to get to the end of the academy. And I teach 3-finger grip and a cable grip and a symmetry grip and yeah, I love them.
Oh.
So important, man. Handles. He used to do like hours of handles and grips.
That's absolutely fascinating.
Oh man, he was just fucking amazing. I mean, I'm just like a little vestige of him, you know, but God, he was amazing.
Well,
Amazing.
that's the thing with Gene. His it's almost like his knowledge, which one of the things that I hopefully have picked up, his knowledge almost of anatomy of the joints, of the subtle differences on what would make something work, not work, be incredibly painful, be stressful on a joint. But that's what I loved. A lot of times I found, and that's where Mark Lyons helped me a lot at his garage, because I know a lot of the Brazilians have been doing stuff since they were little kids, so it just became second nature. But what I found was there was a lack of detailed explanation. It was, here's the move, go do it. You know, and that's oversimplifying, so I get that. But Gene would explain the anatomy of the shoulder joint to say that if you did it this way, yes, it's uncomfortable, but if you simply torque this part of the joint, the wrist, the elbow, whatever it is, and you change that angle ever so slightly, it was like a night and day difference in the move between either working, not working, or working to really debilitate someone. And that's what I really got from Gene, his knowledge of the body in terms of how the joints worked in reference to what we were doing was second. I've never come across that.
Wow.
So, and that appealed to me so much because I taught anatomy in college for 10 years, right? So it was picture perfect for me. I understood it instantly. And the way he taught it was so impeccable because you felt it.
Yeah. Feelings, believing.
That's wild. Let's talk about saying goodbye to him. How difficult was it? And when he had left, your feelings at the time. John Donahue.
Oh my God, it was, yeah. I remember being told about it. I was in the office, and my manager at work came in and told me, because I don't have Facebook or any of that stuff, and it had only sort of just been plugged, and yeah, I guess, you know, I shed some tears, and I was yeah, he it's hard talking about it, in fact. You know, like I said, he was so pivotal for me. I wouldn't be where I am today. There's no other way around it without him. So it was absolutely gut-wrenching. And I do my best, and I check in with Midge, his wife, on a regular basis to see how she's going, because, you know, they were such a team, and she really just did everything for him, especially in his last, you know, days here, which was a struggle for her. She's not young, and she has bad knees, and, you know, and yeah, I mean, it's like, it's hard to describe. And, you know, I well up talking about it, thinking about it, and how amazing and important he was to me, my family. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to describe.
John Perretti.
Well, I did not keep my contact with Midge out of embarrassment. I did not go to the ceremony in California. I was shook, but something happened the night he died to me and with him, in that I had a dream that night, a lucid dream. And Gene was talking to me in the dream, and pissed off and talking about his son, and talking about people, and talking about fighters, and just on and on. This dream was it was so vivid. It was so real. It was just like we were in one room. I remember it felt tight, and it was nerve-wracking, and he was saddened, and he was And I was just, I came out just shaking my head, waking up, shaking my head, going, holy shit, that was unbelievable. I was just, and I don't know who I was with, but I told them, and that morning I got the call that he had died that night
Oh, wow. Wow.
and came to visit me.
Yeah, and I think I was actually in LA probably about a week before he started getting sick, or he wasn't feeling that well, and went to visit him. I'd organized, I'm not sure if I said this in the previous one, but organized some of his books for some of my students. And I've actually got some video of him signing those books. I think they're probably the last. I'm not sure how many people he would have seen after that, because I think he became quite ill not long after that. And so I was just lucky to see him, before that. But yeah, it's like John saying, it's hard to describe.
Yeah, when you meet somebody that makes such an impression on you, wow.
Well, my firstborn son name is Luca LeBell Perretti. Naming my son LeBell, my father didn't speak to me for like 3 years thereafter.
Wow.
Wow. So there's also like pictures of him as a very young man wrestling bears.
Mm-hmm.
Black bears.
Yeah.
A black bear. Black bear. And you could be nice, and you should talk about that. Oh, sorry, John.
No. I'm just saying the photos and with all the scratches all over his back and shoulders and everything.
So he used to say, okay, so you could get in there with that bear, and that bear is like, like a big dog, which they are, black bears, right? And he's like, and you could be nice with him, but if you were just the slightest bit mean with him or something, that thing would tear you up. He goes, so it was trained, but you had to be nice. You had to be nice with the bear.
Holy shit.
So I'll tell you a really funny story. And I don't know if you were there, John, but so Donald Zuckerman, my partner in the Contenders and in Extreme Fighting, Donald Zuckerman got a little bit, he was drinking, and Don got a little bit like little crazy with Gene, like kind of trying to grab him from behind. Oh my God. Were you there, John? It was in a lobby of a hotel.
Yeah.
You were there? Oh my God. I was sweating, man. Oh, Gene, let him go. Oh, please, John, Gene. Oh, come, man. Just let him go. I got him, Gene. I'll take care of him. Gene, can you oh my God. Oh man, I was sweating. And Donald just had no idea how close to death and drowning he was, because he was starting to drown.
Bad move.
Oh, listen, handsome. Yeah, I mean, you said, oh, he was choking you or something, but John said it best, he took you or he took you, I mean, it's like, you just can't appreciate what being taken out, you just don't understand. What you guys don't get is that the pin on the hand grenade was incremental. Right. So, if he yanked the pin out, oh, you were just through. That means he owned you. That means, if I get behind you, you're mine, where that comes from him. Right. So if he chose to yank the pin out of the grenade, he could explode on you and re-explode and re-explode. And when John says, there's a 260-pound man, in a pink gi mounted on you, and he chokes you out, and then chokes you out a different way while he's having a conversation with 20 people in the room, and he chokes you out a different way, and he chokes you, and he takes you out and takes you out. You just don't understand, that he was in total charge all the time.
Wow.
And to go back to what you said before, I think is really important. You know, why there was four is because we were some dedicated motherfuckers, right? And that in him, in us, he saw something that was a microcosm of him. I can tell you that for fact. Because, you know, let's just talk about John. I won't even talk about myself, but, you know, there's a no nonsense quality to the man, right? There's a quietude and a refrain, but then there's another side to Donahue, right? And that's evident. That's a LeBellian aspect, you know, that has permeated his dermis.
Here, let me give you guys a little pushback now. You know, I should probably mention this earlier in the interview. He would refer to the wrestling takedown as a tackle. Mm-hmm. And like when verbiage changed and, you know, styles started to meet each other, he refused in John, you know, Perretti, you as well, refused to change like you calling it anything other than that. Do you think that may have also hurt him? In regards, well, the general public. Like I'm telling you this, our first interview, you're referring to it as a wrestling takedown, whether it's an outside single, inside leg trip. You always refer to it as a tackle. I can't tell you how many phone calls I got. Why is he referring to a takedown as a tackle?
So first, let me apologize for saying that and occupying your fucking phone. But the point is that you learn a language and you keep using the language.
Yeah, I just Windows sycophants is what you refer to the jiu-jitsu community, which is very accurate in some instances. It's kind of like, oh, I found it. Now I don't have to pay attention. And it's like, you know, those are the people that you really don't even want to have conversations with anyway. But it was just more ammunition for the people that maybe had ulterior motives in regards to Gene LeBell. You know, and his.
So you're saying that I contributed to his being looked at funny by saying tackle?
No. I think you kept it real. I think you kept it exactly the way, you know, he taught you. Yeah, you're a LeBellian. You know what I mean? That's what you were taught. And that's where you're going down. But like Joey, did you hear any pushback on that?
I mean, I remember in our first interview, I asked John why he called it a tackle, and I asked if it was a LeBellian term because, besides John Perretti, everybody else was calling it a double leg takedown or a shot, taking a shot, not taking a tackle. It's just leftover lingo from the old school.
But also, Joe, you remind me of something. You know, so you don't forget, I never wrestled.
Right.
So
the only term.
Huh?
But you knew the term.
But I never wrestled. And you guys, those wrestlers, you know, I used to kid around with Blatnick, even on the mic that, you know, you sure you always got all these fucking crazy words for different things, you know, the Twizzler and the thisser and the thater and stuff. You know, so I used to joke about and mock them in that respect too, because, you know, I don't know the lingo, right? So all that stuff, you know, I'm a very defensive guy, right? I fight defensively. I ran all my road work backwards. You know, I'm a defensive, basically grappler. I can turn the corner. Well, I used to be able to. I can't do shit anymore. But I could turn the corner and make you pay for something. But the only reason I could do that is because I lured you into a place that you didn't expect to be in. And John is very different than that. John's an overall motherfucker, and can go any fucking direction on that stuff. But so I'm, in a sense, as I said before, lesser.
How do you guys want to close this out? John Donahue?
Well, you could continue with your assaults. We enjoy that stuff.
Yeah, hardly that. And dude, let me kind of like anybody watching this on Spotify or YouTube, the artwork featured behind John Perretti will be at his art opening. These are all pieces of art that he created himself. Just beautiful pieces of artwork. Want to give that a little plug?
Want to tell us the dates on that?
Oh, I'd love to. I believe our opening is going to be August 9th, 2025. But today the fucking curator decided that he wants to open the show on the 2nd to the public, and then my opening on the 9th. And I said, that makes no fucking sense. I mean, my work is going to be up and the show will be open, and then I'm going to invite people a week later. So I have a problem with that right now, and that just happened this afternoon.
And Donnie, you better be. I should say it's a long trip. It's a long trip. We'll FaceTime. We'll FaceTime so you can see the art exhibit. How about that?
I thought you were going to. It's a giant show, John. I thought you were going to do your show from the space, Mike.
Oh,
we can do a remote.
Yeah, we can do remote.
Yeah, that would be so cool, right?
That would be cool. Yeah, we could do remote. I know this. Like, I'm excited for it. Like, you sent me little samples of some of the artwork that's going to be on display, and I'm excited for it. I got a couple of buddies in Houston that are going to make it over too. They're going to meet me over there.
People coming from all over the world.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. That's cool. John Donahue, how do you want to close this?
Yeah, I mean, Mike, I'm not a big talker on a lot of stuff, but I think I've probably said enough on, in terms of the way I feel on Gene. It's like John said, it's very hard to. I want Gene to be understood, I guess. Like you said, so many people don't, and I've said it. John said it. Don't understand what he was about, who he was as a person, and how incredible he was. Because I never experienced the man, and it becomes this, like you said, as time goes, everything becomes somewhat forgotten and misconstrued, and stories develop. And, I just love for Gene to be remembered for how incredible he was, what he's done for martial arts, what he's done for so many people, including myself and John here. I don't know, probably just the simplicity of just remembering who he was as a person, what he's done, what he's achieved, and the impact he's had on so many people's lives, that a lot of people in the modern day MMA world and whatever else absolutely have, unless they listen to your podcast, have zero idea about. And that's, I guess, the part that saddens me, is that legacy that will probably one day disappear. I think I might have spoken to you. Josh Barnett was out recently, had him at the gym and did a seminar, and we were talking about that and what he wants to create in terms of like a catch wrestling association to try and keep it alive somewhat, that's legitimate and so on. But I'm somewhat fearful that it's still going to over time disappear. And at least if we can remember Gene for who he was and what he achieved and what he gave everyone, that'd be the most important thing for me, and that'd be probably the biggest memory for me, and his legacy and the difference he made in my life. So,
John Perretti?
I would not be in such incredible company in an honorific way without Gene. There's just hours of sitting in his office, amidst tchotchkes and memorabilia. I would not, I would not be a part of the inner sanctum of this man. This man was incredibly generous to me, and he was instrumental in my understanding of becoming well-rounded. And I dove in, as I do with everything, but I dove in, you know, deep, deep, immediately in the you know, in the Lebellian Sea. You know, when you name your firstborn son, you know, his name, you know, it's just it's honorific, you know, and this guy was just, he was self-effacing. He downplayed his own, but again, he'd be talking to somebody and kind of like softening them up and verbally, and then look over at me, and there'd be like this glint in his eye, and you just, I just knew that this could go bad at any moment. And he would wink too. He's a winker. I mean, John knows, he fucking look and go, and then wink at you, and you're like, oh fuck, this could go bad. The potential for violence was amazing. It was palpable to some. Other people were incredibly ignorant, and thought it was just a comedic act. It was no act. The facade was the act. I just miss him so much.
Yeah. You know, like they always say, you choose your friends and not your family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of nice to see there's only 4 black belts. Only 4. You know, he chose his friends.
Yeah.
Wow. Joey.
He's got a hell of a legacy that needs to be remembered. I wish I could say I trained with him like these guys. I got to train with him a few dozen times, and by then he was in his 70s. But I was aware that I was in the presence of greatness, and that his roots go back to, you know, way before our time. And it was an honor that I got to spend the time with him that I did. And I'm glad we could get these 2 gentlemen on here and go deeper to the legend of LeBell.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. I think we broke the 2-hour mark, and you know, let's just hope this inspires other people in the comment section to leave their stories and their memories about a guy that obviously impacted so many. And I think, I know we're closing, but I think one of the, I say only 4 black belts, he never really had a studio because he was so busy working in Hollywood. So it was essentially, he'd pick up little stragglers along the way, chasing like 99% of them off, but then the 1% that stuck around, you know, he made sure he kept them close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, John Donahue, like you said, if you taught like Gene LeBell, you'd have 4 students. You've been teaching almost 30 years. You know what I mean?
Bad for business.
Yeah. And, you know, and the other part to this, Mike, is, you know, we could sit here and talk about Gene's stories for hours. You know, there'd be no, you know, the stories that John would have, the stories that I would have, and whatever else. And, you know, would never do the man justice. But this has been, it's actually been outstanding that you gone to this sort of trouble to like, as Joey said, about the legacy of the man and how important that is. And hopefully the comments are positive and people can appreciate, even though they might not have experienced being around Gene, that how you know, incredible, and the effect that he's had on so many people's lives. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, excellent. Gentlemen, thank you so much. And John Donahue, yeah, fantastic episode. John Donahue, I will absolutely be in touch. I think BKFC is going out to Australia. I'm going to try to tag along to that. I'll make sure you get some good tickets, and I'm certainly going to want a picture with you.
Thanks, Mike. No problem.
Take care, brother. John Perretti.
Sir.
That was fucking good, dude. That was good. That was good. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think 1.5% of our listeners are women, and then there's one like 0.4% is like non-binary, according to our Spotify.
So we have to do a better job of appealing to that market. Is that what you're saying?
We got to grow it out. Okay. So I took a course. It was like a little over $30. I've got to give shout outs to the people that post their comments. So just give me a second, dude. The money was so well spent. So Greg Compton, Hong Kong Fooey, Adam 3353, Aaron P 5657, John Perretti. Do you have any words for them?
I don't know who the fuck that is.
Perfect. You nailed it.
Slothmaster 101, DeVry.
Oh, that's that fucking guy. I remember his name, Slothmaster. I remember. See,
fuck him too, John.
Fucking, these people, they just, they believe their own bullshit.
Yeah. DeBracco 7748, Scotty 1649. Any messages for them?
I can't differentiate. They're all the fucking same. They're a bunch of fucking pencil necks, masturbating in their fucking houses, thinking that they were at a place where, I say this to people all the time. They go, oh, well, Jonathan Snowden says, and I go, oh, fuck. Oh, excuse me, Jonathan, were you there? Were you there? John's calling me. I don't know why he's calling me.
He just left. Okay, I'm going to tell you this, Joey. In this very hands-on 1 hour long course that I took with 100 other people in the chat room, the shout-outs, I think that would go against their standard of understanding of how
telling them to go fuck themselves.
Yes, I don't think that helps with interactions. However, our fans,
yeah, they might like that.
I think they would enjoy that actually. So like, share, subscribe. Dude, Joey, we got to be at Perretti's art opening. I think I got the miles to have us covered.
I'm down. Just book us 2 rooms, or not, just 2 beds.
Really? I thought
I'm not crossing that line. Although it would help us appeal to the trans, I guess. I don't know.
We'd have the non-binary group.
Yeah.
Okay. Joey, love you, brother. That was a good one, man.
Good one. Thank you.
Later.